The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quirky Dog Podcast, inspired by some of the quirkiest dogs you can ever imagine, and the owners who love them. This podcast is brought to you by the quirky couple themselves, Scott and Jess Williams. Their aim is to educate and entertain. Here's Scott and Jess.
Welcome, guys, and happy Wednesday. Thank you for joining us here today on the Quirky Dog Podcast, and we are excited to talk to you about all of the joys that summer can bring, but also some of the dangers that summer can bring, especially as it relates to your dog. But first, we're going to start with the quirky tip of the day. You want to give them our tip?
Yeah, it's been a hell of a week, but I'm going to get right into the tip. So the tip of the week
Are you too tired?
is...
Are you too tired for the tip right now?
No, it's been stress and anxiety all week.
It's been stress and anxiety all 2020.
So what I have here are some pieces of old leashes, the ends with the bolt snap on them, and we use them as a tab. So if you have a dog that's not fully trained, and maybe dog's getting up on the couch and you want to get them off the couch, I would recommend that you clip on maybe 18 inches of an old leash. So instead of giving the dog a big hug every time they do something wrong to move them, you can just pick up the leash and give them some guidance off the couch or away from the front door or window if they start barking. And you can buy these. I mean, this is like a professional one that you could purchase. And the theory here is that you start by letting them drag a whole leash, and then you go to a half leash, and you keep making it shorter and shorter until you don't need it anymore. So I used to use one something like this that had a little ring on the end where I could clip an actual leash onto it, and then I'd unclip the leash as if I've taken the leash off, but there was still a little bit extra hanging on the dog. So that's it. That's the tip of the day.
I think you were the first one that kind of explained that to me too, even with the recall. If you use a long line at first, and then you go to a 6-foot leash, and then you go shorter and shorter and shorter, the tab itself for the dog is like, oh, okay, like I still have some piece of equipment under me. I still have some control.
With some control. Yeah.
And then a lot of dogs that are snarky, especially small dogs, no offense to our small dogs, but getting off the couch or whatever, if they're going to go after you for picking them up at night, you could just take that leash, clip it right to the end of the tab, and then get them off the couch rather than reaching in and creating a lot of conflict. It's always nice to have a dog
that goes after you all the time. If you have a dog like...
Some dogs are a little cranky while they're napping.
A lot of us have dogs that go after us.
I get a little cranky while I nap too. All right, so we're going to talk about summer. And summer can be great, and it's great to have no blue-green algae so far in the waters. That was a big problem last year. Dogs had a health concern with swimming, and there's a lot of joys with summer. Right now, it's
I
a
love
little
summer. Keg parties, nude beaches.
That's not quite as exciting for the dogs, but it's exciting for Scott, I suppose. So one thing, though, that people sometimes fail to consider or realize or think about, especially since we've all been cooped up for months and now we can finally start getting out and doing stuff, is the way that the heat impacts our dogs. So the first thing I want to bring up, in case for some reason you're not going to join us this whole episode, is water intoxication, because that is something that isn't that widely known, I'd say. It doesn't happen that frequently, luckily. But if you have a dog who loves swimming, that's like the best activity to do during the summer, right? Your dog's hot, it's a lake, let's go swimming. If your dog is swimming a lot, like for an hour, let's say, and they're ingesting a lot of water, they can have something called water intoxication, which looks similar to overheating, but you'll see like a loss of coordination. The dog could vomit. There'll definitely be a gum color change, like the gums will start getting a little bit lighter. And then if it really advances, you can go into like seizing and everything else. So it's something that you want to be thoughtful of. Swimming is a great thing to do with our dogs in these warmer temps, but if your dog is super excited about going into the water and go, balls to the walls, make sure that you give them, a 5-minute break here and there so they can kind of regulate their bodies. And I didn't bring one, but can I have your coffee top?
No.
One thing that a lot of people do is they'll throw like balls or bumpers or something to the dog, and that's fine. That's like a great toy. You want anything that'll float. But the flatter the toy is for the dog to grab that toy, the better it actually is. They're not going to have as much water going into their mouth. So if I throw a tennis ball out, they have their gums open in the back, and all that water can rush in, and water intoxication can be more of a concern for dogs like that.
Yeah, I think you're more likely to have that happen with a dog that is real drivey for the ball.
Yeah.
It's doing a lot of retrieving and stuff like that.
Yeah, but little dogs, it can happen quicker because they're smaller. It's just kind of one of those little known facts that it's that type of situation where people say like, oh my God, this just happened to my dog. And we know a lot more dog people than you guys, so we are more aware of this situation. And you just think, your heart sinks like, oh my gosh, I wish someone had known that water intoxication was a thing, rather than just seeing their dog struggle after swimming for half an hour and then maybe their dog didn't make it. So just keep that in mind. Do a quick Google research. Swimming's awesome, but watch for too much in the water intoxication.
I don't think that's too big of a thing, but
I know. It's Scott.
I've never seen a dog get water intoxication in my life.
Scott always weighs it. You've swam like a dozen dogs in your whole life.
They all lived.
Okay, so let's talk about dogs and cars. That's a good one for you.
I think this is much more important than the damn water intoxication.
I just want to get it out of the way.
Leaving dogs in the car when you run in to get a coffee or go into Home Depot to get something, you think it's going to be 2 minutes. Next thing you know, they got you waiting on a line, standing in these spots, putting on a mask. 2 hours later, you come back and your dog's all dried up in the back seat.
And now it's becoming like a criminal thing too. So you have to be.
It should be.
There's a difference between it being a 75-degree day and there being good ventilation in the car and you running into the gas station to pay for gas versus being in a store for 3 hours on a 90-degree day. But people can legally break windows, call police, do all kinds of stuff. So be careful about leaving your dogs in the car, and especially leaving them where they're visible. Maybe they're loose or something, at least if they're in the crate in the back and you can give ventilation and everything else, you have some more options.
Yeah, I posted this on my Facebook page, and it just talks about the difference between inside the car and outside the car real quick. I just want to hit on it. 75-degree day seems really moderate, not a big deal. Inside the car, 99 degrees. And it goes up really quick. I mean, 80 degrees outside, 112 in the car. So the dog is not going to last in the car for 20 minutes, I'm not saying it's going to kill them, but they're going to suffer a great deal. You get to a 90-degree day, it gets up 120 degrees in the car. So be thoughtful about that. And, I used to travel with dogs in a utility van when I lived in Los Angeles, where it could get up to 100 degrees. It was a common thing. And I used to and I'm not trying to jump ahead.
That's okay, we mentioned
But I would get big spaghetti pots and fill them with water and put them in my freezer. And then I would put these spaghetti pots, it's like a big ice block, in the crate with the dog attached to the side. And it was beautiful in the van. I mean, as far as temperature, I'd have these big blocks of ice. The dogs would be very comfortable. They were never panting. And of course, and then as it melted, they would drink the water that was in the pot. But it was a utility van. It wasn't a nice vehicle because there is going to be water. I'd come out and there'd be water running out of the corner of my van on the parking lot,
And you were talking about too with travel that there's a little bit of a risk there with the big.
Well, you want to fasten them if you're going to have something like that.
You don't want to have a 20-pound dog and then the spaghetti pot of frozen ice
75-pound block
goes into
ice.
the skull. Now we're talking about a little bit different situation, but it's a good way to keep the crate cool. And if you can just isolate the crate itself, barring that all your electronics are functioning well or all of your gadgets, that's important. Speaking of that, Ryobi fans are on sale right now. That is a huge dog person item. So they're battery operated fans. You can get them at Home Depot. I think Walmart sells them.
These are rechargeable batteries.
Yeah.
So they're really powerful, like the drills.
Yeah.
So you get really good
you can hook them right in front of your dog's crate, and their crate can be a lot cooler than your actual car. And we had Sensor Push on a few weeks back on the podcast, and we really like that product for this exact reason. You can have a sensor push in your car. If your dog's not going to be an ass about it, you can put a sensor push inside their crate. You can know the temperature of the crate, of the car, of whatever you're looking at, and it's all Bluetooth activated. So you want to be aware of these things so you don't run into a problem, because the one thing that can happen is the dogs are going to start to get like some heat exhaustion, and we're going to get into that a little bit later. But then if they actually go into full-on heat stroke, that can get ugly, and sometimes there's no turning back from that.
That's beyond ugly. Heat stroke that's a near death. If not, you got to put the dog down. Heat exhaustion you can get your dog back from, but when they go into heat stroke, they need IV liquids to get them cooled down. It's a big thing.
Their temperature, their body temperature goes so high that they can start getting brain damage and everything
getting
else.
Back to the fans, keeping air moving is a really big thing, because even when it's hot, if the air is moving, it keeps the humidity lower. If they're sitting in this dead space, panting and panting, creating more humidity in that environment, it's just it goes downhill really quick.
Yeah, and you were talking about the tubes for the air conditioning too.
Yeah, they make an accessory now on some of these dog product websites where you can hook a hose up to your air conditioning vent on the front, run that hose back and stick it right into your crate, which is in the back of the vehicle that may not get air conditioning back there. So you're pumping some cool air back there for your dog too. Just because it's cool in the front seat Doesn't mean if you're in a van or an SUV, it could easily be a 20-degree difference at the back of the vehicle from the front, easily.
Yeah. And then you have those shades that you can put up. What are they? Like the reflective silver ones?
Yeah. Stuff to keep, if you're parked.
Yeah. So like if the dog is in a crate, now you can pop open the hatch, throw that over, get one of those things that locks. What's that for the SUVs that we have? Like the locking thing?
Yeah. So you can have your hatchback open, but someone can't come in and like steal everything out of the car or take your dog out. Which,
depending on what kind of dog you have, people may not be going into your car anyway. But these are all little precautions that you can take. And if you're out of the car for 5 minutes and somebody says something, you can go right back to the car and say, hey, look, I have this sensor push here. It was 79 degrees in the car. It's actually 82 out here today. I have this sunshade. I have this fan, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And people get off your back pretty quickly. But the dogs that are loose in the car and, just feeling that sun beating on them, it's hard. It's hard to get out of the sun no matter where you're parked sometimes when you're in a car. And it's a lot harder inside the car than outside the car. Let's talk about yards too real quick before we're on break. So you have more experience with this.
I will just to conclude with that. In Massachusetts now, it is against the law to leave a dog in a car under any conditions. Yeah. What were we going to say?
That's why we moved.
Yeah, I had to leave the state when they enacted that.
Dogs in yards. You lived in LA, so you're more familiar with dogs being super hot. What kind of things do you do?
So I used to keep my dog in a dog run when I wasn't home. And I put a sunshade over the top of that thing to keep the sun directly off the dog. Of course, they had fresh water in there. But I would put those misters
like at the amusement
across
parks.
The top so that I'd turn that on, and so it'd be just blowing this mist on the dogs. And then I would have a fan. Maybe all this sounds like overkill, but this is just what I did for my dogs, and they never had a problem. And it was hot as hell there, But I'd have a fan, an oscillating fan on the dog run, and a mister going, and I never had to stress about the dogs. They'd always be fine,
I think it's good.
Yeah, I mean, you got to take care of them. I mean, this is why they don't like people. They got to have a non-tip bowl and make sure they have access to water. And they enact these laws because people leave their dog tied to a tree in the backyard with no water. It's friggin' crazy.
Yeah, and it's literally like just not a pleasant way for the dogs to go.
No, you're better off shooting them in the head than leaving them tied to a tree with no water.
It's not a fire where you just burn up. Like heat exhaustion is really traumatic for them. So we're going to talk about...
On a more pleasant note...
We're going to talk about the concerns about pavement and getting into a little bit more of the intricacies of heat exhaustion and heat stroke and what that necessarily looks like and means after the break. And we're also going to do the quirky question of the day.
Happy Howie's dog treats are made with real slow-cooked beef, lamb, and turkey. Choose from deli-style sausages, wolf sticks, jerky, burger treats, and our soft meat roll treats. All of our treats are available in bulk or in convenient resealable packages. And dogs just love Happy Howie's. They are made in the USA and available at thousands of retailers nationwide. And online at happyhowies.com. Try Happy Howie's today and save 10% with promo code Quirky10. Happy Howie's. We're making it real.
All right, we are back.
One
thing about the misters before we move on is you said about running vinegar through them.
Yeah, they'll start to get kind of calcium buildup in those lines, and then they stop working. They're inexpensive.
I saw that in the notes. So I just want to mention that if you go the mister route and you go crazy like us and your house is like Disney World now, put a little vinegar through those every few weeks or months. Okay, we're on to the quirky question of the day. Are you ready?
I am.
I didn't even share it with you, so maybe you could just answer it candidly. How do I get my dog to come consistently when it's called? And this is from Nancy in Florida.
Well, I would say that nothing is perfect, first of all. You're not going to get 100% recall out of any dog, no matter how well they're trained. You may have a very high level of reliability, but if you care about your dog and you're smart, you will be thoughtful about when you take them off leash. And that being said, the way to get consistency is to actually train them to come when called and get them to understand what come means. And I personally would use a long line and a lot of food, and it would become a foundational behavior that I start with puppies right from 8 weeks as soon as I get them. If I got a rescue that was 2 or 3 years old, typically they don't have a lot of training. They don't come when called. I would go with an electric collar, and I would start teaching them to come with an electronic collar to get that reliability so that the dog could have more freedom. So I could take him off leash in the woods and stuff and actually get that reliability when I call them.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to be off leash. If I have a dog that is like, well, half the time they come, half they don't, my dogs are not going to be off leash with that kind of a consistency rate. I would let them drag a 20-foot line behind them when I go for a hike so that I can actually get that long leash if something comes up, wildlife, other dogs, so I can get them back to me.
Yeah, you don't want to get those BS raps of the dog blowing you off. And this is like some weird fallacy that people have a 10-week-old puppy and they'll call and say, well, when I say come, the puppy doesn't come all the time.
Well, they usually come when they're 10 weeks. Once they get to be 5-6 months,
when they're in their
gone.
honeymoon phase. The point of that is you don't want to use your recall word practically necessarily. So we have recalls for our dogs. I say, sync come to one dog. I say vital here to another dog. We don't actually say those phrases that frequently. So a lot of times it's just informal, like, come on over here, let's go, bup, 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 bup. You can get a puppy to you a million different ways. Your recall word should be sacred. So don't just use that and abuse it and get the dog used to just blowing you off when they hear it, okay? So a few different ways there, but I think overall we covered it.
Yeah, the last thing that the dog really understands well is the verbal cue. They understand the physical cues much quicker than the verbal. So if you can get the dog's attention, kneel down, clap your hands, you're much more likely to get the dog to come to you than to stand there stoically and say, dog, come. And the dog's like, F you, and they take off down the path,
Yeah, and you want to use your good treats for the come command. So if you're working with a puppy, we do these restrain recalls. Give me the pig real quick so we can.
Okay, we're going to do a restrain with the pig.
All right, so we do restrain recalls with puppies where we hold the front of their chest and we get them really excited to go.
This is a corn-fed pig. I got my corn right here.
And then the handler, goes out, whatever, probably 10, 20 feet, at first. And then they're going to do the recall word. And then the handler actually takes off or has the dog chasing something, whether it be food or a toy or something else. But that enacts the prey drive too. And you want to have the really good, yummy stuff for come. So don't do a come session after the dog's had, breakfast or, after it's just gorged on a bone. That's where you have your good, yummy treats, salmon, steak, whatever your dog really loves and enjoys.
Yeah. And if you're used to putting like 6 cups of dog food in the bowl in the morning and it's just there all day, this method is not going to work for you. The dog isn't hungry. The dog has no appreciation for food. It's always there. You want a hungry dog, and that's why we like to incorporate some structure into their feeding schedule as well.
Yeah. All right, so quirky question of the day, come when called, is a big one. A lot of people have thoughts on it, so those were our quick thoughts that we shared. And if you have a recall word that doesn't work, switch it up. Have a new one for this summer. A little bit of a new beginning is never bad. All right, I want to talk about hot pavement because that's something that's often kind of overlooked with dogs in the summer and everything else. So we don't think about it much, right? We're going to leave here. We're going to walk across asphalt, go to our cars. I'm wearing my fancy boots today. I got my boots on. Oh, you can't see, but they got heels on them.
Those are hooker boots.
Scott's wearing his flip-flops too, but he's not that flexible to show you. Anyway, when we walk, here we go. It's a good job, babe. When we walk out,
I think I pulled my hamstring.
Yeah, probably. We're going to be on asphalt, and it's not going to bother us at all because we're wearing shoes. The dogs and their paws, you guys, it literally can be like walking out from the vet's office into the car, like blistering the next day. Like it can really be a problem. So a few things that you can do if they're smaller. A lot of people in Florida last year had a lot of blistering and agility trials right from leaving the building. So you can do, if the dog's small enough, carry it. We've talked about Musher's Secret before. Musher's Secret is something you can put on it. Or just simply move your car over. Like, don't have the dogs walking over it. Do a quick surface touch with your hand. But it's really hot. We don't feel it so much. When you're on the beach, I'm on the beach more now that I live in New England than when I lived in the Midwest. But you walk through the beach and you're barefoot and you're like, whoa, my toesies are a little bit hot. That happens with the dogs pretty quick.
Yeah, well, the pads are similar to people in bare feet. I mean, when I was a kid, if you were in bare feet all summer, your feet got really tough. Then you could walk over rocks and you had a better tolerance for heat and things like that. But most of these dogs are living inside in a nice, cushy environment. So it is going to burn their pads. Another thing I'll say, and this did happen to me with one of my dogs once, when I lived in LA, it's hard to keep, it's not hard to keep grass alive, but you got to water the heck out of it all the time. And then if you have dogs, they tear up the yard and they ruin the grass. So I bought the artificial turf, which looked awesome. Never had to water it. Always beautiful out there. It's plastic grass. And when it's 100 degrees out, that plastic grass gets very, very hot. And I didn't realize it. I'm letting the dog out there. And then one day he didn't want to go out in the yard. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And he had friggin' blood blisters on the bottom of his pads. He was also a very drivey dog. He'd be out there running around and stuff. But if you have a plastic yard, you got to get out there and water that thing down and cool it off a little bit too when it gets super hot,
Yeah, and next week we're going to do...
have a sunshade, have a easy up out there. I know you love easy ups.
We got more segments, but I'm just going to float this now. Next week, we're going to do an intro to get your dogs, teach them how to swim. And as a side note to that, if I don't remember to mention it in that podcast, if your dog's been swimming a lot and then they are running on pavement, their pads are going to be weaker too. So not only is that pavement going to be hot, but be thoughtful of that is if they're softening their pads in the water and then they're ripping around poolside or whatever in between swim sessions, their pads are going to get weaker also. Okay, so heat exhaustion, heat stroke. What is it? How bad is it? Do I want it? No, nobody wants it. But things to look for and specific things that you can do to maybe head off a real emergency. So normally I think of it as like the dog's heart rate's going quicker. The eyes normally look a little bit glassy. Like if you look at the dog, it's like, oh, are you stoned? What's going on? Like their eyes get a little bit glassed over. So you need to be seeing these signs before they're full on like rear end collapse and that type of thing.
Heavy panting, laying on the ground on their side. Not taking water is a huge sign of a problem. Mm-hmm. They're overly heated and they're not taking water. That's a big problem.
Yeah, and one thing that's really good, and it's kind of a little known fact, but if you can actually get the dog to like just mosey around and urinate, that actually helps like their system clear out and make sure everything's functioning and everything else. So even if they're not drinking yet. So one thing that this is an absolute don't do is if the dog is really hot, you don't want to just like stick their head in cold water. Like so many people think, okay, like my dog's having a hard time. They're really warm. I'm going to go and I'm going to cool them right off. So the best place to cool them off is the head. Well, under their belly is okay. Their armpits are good, but you don't want to just take that head now and immerse it in really cold water when maybe their body temp's like 104, 105, and all of a sudden they're in like 65-degree water.
That's what my dad did to me when I was a kid.
Yeah, this explains so much.
It's true. I had pneumonia. He freaked out, took me outside, threw me in the snow.
Yep.
I've never been the same.
Well, there's no scientific proof of what he was like before that, so we can't argue that incident was the issue there. So that's a thing that you shouldn't do. Tell them about the alcohol that you were reading about.
This is new to me. I had never heard this before, but apparently taking isopropyl alcohol, putting it on the pads.
Rubbing alcohol is a commodity now, guys. We learned all about everything it can do after the stores didn't have it.
It evaporates so quickly, it's cooling the paw, and they sweat through their paws, and that's, so that's a thing to do. And apparently I read they did this for one dog when they brought the dog to the vet and it was overheating. They put alcohol in the paws. I hadn't heard about that before. So be careful with it, because if the paws are actually torn for some reason, you pour alcohol on them, it's going to be very unpleasant. Then you'll know how sick they really are. They'll either jump up and bite you or they'll lay there twitching.
Yeah, that did happen with your dog. Scott's dog had a weird foot thing a few months ago. I think
took
it was
him for his first
allergy.
bike ride of the season, and he splits a pad on the.
But he had a food allergy, so I had a diluted apple cider vinegar spray that I was doing, and then we used a colloidal silver spray to like heal stuff. And I did the apple cider spray on a split pad, and he wasn't thrilled about that. So there is proof in the pudding how sick the dog is when you spray their paws.
Another thing about the cooling a dog off, and I mean I heard this early on, and I don't know, it makes sense to me. If you have a dog that has a decent coat, a medium, or certainly a double coat like a shepherd, right when they get out of the water, the best thing to do is take a towel and dry them off. Towel dry them the best you can, because that wet coat acts like a wet blanket, keeping the heat in their body. And if you dry them off pretty good, it allows that heat to now escape through the hair. And that's why you don't want to just soak the whole dog down if they're hot. Get under their stomach, because their coats are supposed to act as an insulator for heat and cold. Keeps them cool in the summer, keeps them warm in the winter. But when it's soaked, it's just a big wet blanket on their body.
Yeah, and the risk factors that you're looking for here is if you have a brachiocephalic dog, a dog with like a flatter face, pug, something like that, they're going to have a harder time breathing. That was the type of breed that they put in the overhead compartment in the airplane, and the dog died in a short flight.
Yeah. Any other dog you could do that with. But don't do it with an English bulldog. They don't like that overhead compartment.
I think it was a pug. But either way, flat-faced dogs concern. Your dog's overweight. You need to be a little more conscious about them and their well-being and everything else being out in the heat. And then if your dog has a dark-coated fur color, so like dogs that are like fully white seem to tolerate heat a little better than the dogs that are all black and have one little spot of white on their head or something. So just be thoughtful of all these little things, because it depends on the dog about how they're going to tolerate heat, but these risk factors can make it even more of a concern. And humidity is a huge thing. Just because the temp isn't super high, if that heat index and the humidity is up, or if you're now, in the mountains for some reason, you can travel again. Yay, lucky for you. And you have the altitude stuff. All of these things affect dogs, and they affect how they're going to process heat and everything else. Don't get yourself in a big, long hike where you're an hour from the car and your dog's having a hard time. Take breaks. Be thoughtful of your dog. And even if your dog is in really good shape, the heat affects us all differently, and it can be a little bit of a concern over the summer.
Yeah, bring water with you too. Bring a canteen for the dog.
Or ice cubes. A lot of dogs just like to kind of just have a little something, wet their whistle, and that's nice and cool on them.
Yeah, one thing I would say about the heat and the dogs is our dogs love to retrieve, and we don't get the opportunity to go on a lot of hikes all the time. So I'll take the dog out in the backyard and I'll throw the ball for him, 6, 8, 10 times, depending on the heat. But I could easily run my dog into heat exhaustion with the ball. So I need to, be conscious of the temperature. And even though my dog could do another 6 or 10 retrieves, I stop before he overheats or gets uncomfortable, because he'll just keep going. He just loves it.
Yeah, and that brings up, we seem to be talking about dogs a lot of drive, and that might not relate to your pets. Well, some dogs don't seem that physically active, but they're staring at the frickin' tree looking at the squirrel for 20 minutes. And that mental exhaustion, honestly, can really amp the dog up as well. So be mindful of that. I have a border collie like that as well. She doesn't have to do a lot physical, but she's putting so much into everything mentally that it's making her more fatigued and more tired and hotter quicker. So just know your dog, be thoughtful of what you're dealing with. If you're going into a new situation, keep your dog as a top priority and on the forefront of your mind. And we want you guys to have a fun summer. We've been all cooped up most of the spring. We want you to get out there, enjoy your dogs. Dogs enjoy the nice weather, but you do want to be thoughtful of some of these things that can be dangerous.
Last thing you want to do on a beautiful summer day is sit at the vet with your dog, all stressed out.
And I know multiple people, guys, who have had dogs pass away from water intoxication and heat exhaustion and everything else, and very, conscientious dog owners. It can happen quickly. And we know more dog people than a lot of people. So we're not trying to scare you, but you want to see these things, see the warning signs, and then turn things around as quick as possible. Next week, we are going to do how to teach your dog to swim. That is a topic that is near and dear to Scott's heart, and he has taught a lot of dogs
right out in the middle of the ocean
to swim. If you need anything from us, you can email us at studio@thequirkydog.com. And in the meantime, keep it quirky.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates.